Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. On this episode of Last Unrifled Yaw, we have a conversation with Derek Hunter of Love Chaos. We talk about a lot of different things, but the main focus is on his use of entity work and narrative and how he ties that into particularly a trilogy of books that we'll get into detail that take existing frameworks from old stories like Parsifal or the Divine Comedy, uh, and then merges them with his own mythological system to create something that is, I guess you'll have to hear for yourself. Hey everyone, this is Last Unrifled Yaw, and this is Ali, and today we have Derek Hunter. Derek, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me on here, Ali. I really enjoyed a previous episode that you had, and I've checked out your work. It's been really interesting, fascinating stuff that you do. So really happy to be here. Um, so for myself, I'm a writer. First and foremost, a writer. I've written 8 books and working on my ninth book. And most of the books I write are works of fiction or stories. So I consider myself mostly a storyteller. That's my main thing. Is my passion is for telling stories. Um, and but There was a number of different books. 3 books that I wrote, which were exploring my philosophy of love chaos. The first book came out in 2014. The second one in 2019, and the third came out in 2020. And there was just exploring different elements to what love chaos is, and that was those books were definitely the ones that got myself engaged with a fair amount of people, especially like in the occult world, in the underground scene, the counterculture scene, and it was fun to explore the philosophy of love chaos with various different people, going on different podcasts and talking to people, and it definitely was great to see interest in those books. And I continue to do Love Chaos. Is still very much a part of my life. Love Chaos. I do weekly peer-to-peer support meetings, and those are 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 going very well, and looking forward to that continuing to develop and grow as well, and benefiting others and myself. So Love Chaos is definitely like a big part of my life as well, as being a storyteller. But I'm continuing to go back to writing stories. I'm a storyteller at heart, and for the foreseeable future, I have some plans for writing some essays. I like Montaigne very much, the French philosopher, and I like his collected works of essays. So I've always thought it'd be cool to do some love chaos essays in the future at some point. So I have some future projects planned, but most of the stuff that I've done in the past and most of the stuff I'm planning to do in the future are works of fiction. And I for me, telling a story is a great way to explore not only my personal experiences but um, existence as a whole. So it's about telling a story, but also about exploring life in different ways. And I use language and experimentation with language as a means to do that kind of exploring.
All right, so what exactly is Love Chaos?
Sure, it was something that I created back in 2014 because I was really at a bad point in my life. I had a history of addiction to hard drugs and to alcohol that created a lot of problems for me. And I was looking into the possibility of, joining 12-step meetings, or, and or just the idea of adapting like another philosophy. I had experience as a Christian in my early, from the age of 19, 20, 21. Uh, so it was something that I didn't really feel like a lot of people, what they do when they're struggling with addiction is that they adapt some kind of philosophy to help them get through that experience, because it's very difficult to come out of a life of addiction and unstable mental health. And that's where I was at, and I was in just a really low state of my life. And then I was only not only was I in a low state of my life, but I was also a father and responsible for my son's life. So I just didn't really know what to do. I felt hopeless because I just was not happy or satisfied with like other philosophies or religions. So I remember I've always liked William Blake. I liked his paintings and his poetry, and I remember coming across this quote, and I can't remember the exact quote right now, but he said something like, "I will not be a slave to another man's system. I'll create. I'm going to go ahead and create my own." I thought, well, screw it, let me do that. Let me make up something that I appeals to me, that makes sense to me, that I feel comfortable with. And it's because so often, when I was going to my therapist that year, and she was telling me, well, just take what you like and just leave what you don't. And that's what, people usually do. But I'm a very stubborn person, and I just can't, I have a hard time with that. And I do that in certain other areas of my life. But when it comes to like a belief system, I just really couldn't just do that, just do something half-assed. So I had to do something my own. And so I thought, well, my father, who was a big influence on me, and was an agnostic, and I would say not like a passive agnostic, but a very active agnostic, and that was a big. I really like that about him. It's something that I like also about Robert Anton Wilson, who I know you're into as well, um, and is this idea of embracing doubt, embracing uncertainty. And my dad actually, in his play he wrote before he passed away in 2005, um, there's a character who talks about this church of many doubts. So like basically like a church where people could go, when rather than preaching faith and certainty, it's sort of about preaching uncertainty and doubt. And I've always liked that idea, and we had a lot of conversations and discussions over the years prior to his passing. And I thought, well, that's really a core component to who I am, is my agnosticism, is embracing doubt. And so why don't I create something that's like that? So I thought of, and chaos has always been a word and an idea that's appealed to me since my teens. There was an early work, a play I wrote actually called Chaos, and or no, I think it was called Chaos Reigns or something. But chaos has always been something that's appealed to me. When I first was getting into the occult, it was chaos magic that appealed to me. And so the word chaos was something that, rather than being scared of or intimidated by, I thought it'd be good to embrace. And for me, it was important for me to not just embrace chaos, but to embrace love. And there was a filmmaker who was a big influence on me by the name of John Cassavetes, and he was obsessed with love, and not necessarily like in this romantic notion of love, which I'm also very much appealed to as well. Being a lover of Shakespeare, romance is something I've just always struck a chord with me. But it's just more than just romantic love. There's a lot of different other kinds of love, and what appealed to me about John Cassavetes' films was the the willingness to go through really awkward, uncomfortable things and human experiences, and just for both men and women, just being able, just for human beings, just to be able to go through all their insecurities in this kind of emotionally powerful way, and it just, that really appealed to me. So Cassavetes was a big influence, and so for me, it was like, well, if I'm going to embrace doubt and embrace uncertainty and embrace chaos, love had to be like the anchor. It had to be the thing that got me through all the uncertainty as well, because I knew I needed to have some kind of grounding. So out of this was how Love Chaos was created. And I wrote a book at the time. It was like 45 different little chapters. Each chapter is just a page long, and just some insights that I had. And even though it was at the time I was in the heart of my struggles, I still wanted to put something out there for the world. And so I did that, and then Love Chaos grew as I grew. I took a break from writing because I had to go back to school. I decided to be a drug and alcohol counselor, and so I went back to school and was doing that full time and working. And so while I was there, I definitely learned a fair amount, just in terms of not only about myself, but psychology and group dynamics and helping people with addiction. So that really helped to inform a lot of what Love Chaos would come to be. And then that's when I wrote the second book in 2019, which was Love Chaos in Theory and Practice, and that's where I was able to connect with a fair amount of people in a small way, for sure. And then there's a third book that followed in 2020, which was called The End of the World, which was based on a 6 day ritual that I did in 2020, which was the intent was for the survival and evolution of human beings. And my working with different entities that I've been working with for a number of different years, over a decade, and yeah, so that was the third book. And again, I'm not planning on writing any books on Love Chaos for the near future, but in the far future, I do have some books planned. In the meantime, I just do these weekly peer-to-peer support meetings on Zoom, and let people know about that. And those have been going great. And so for right now, that's what the shape that Love Chaos is taking. And I Love Chaos. So the basic principle to Love Chaos is that it sees reality as inherently chaotic and unpredictable, but then within that uncertain universe that we live in, is to focus on love. And so that's just like the basic uh, guiding principle that I have. And there's other things to it as well, but that's the basic guiding principle that I have, and that I do my best to inform my daily life too. And whether it's on a personal level with people in my life, or at work, or on the internet, or wherever, I really try to have that principle guide me in my life. And it also informs my writing too, for sure. Like my writing explores my mythology. Part of Love Chaos is, I believe, it's important for an individual to create their own mythology of entities that they work with. And so the Story of Us All trilogy explores my concepts of these different entities and what they represent, uh, and on a psychological level, on a philosophical level, on a magical practice level. So within the stories, there's also this exploration of the mythology that's involved in what Love Chaos is about.
I have a couple questions for you. So the first thing I was wondering about is, it's okay if you don't want to discuss in detail, but I'm curious about, um, did you say it was a 6 day ritual?
Yes, yes, it was a 6 day ritual I had been planning since 2019. The idea is for doing like a long, prolonged, like a ritual was something I'd been wanting to do for a while, but the details started in 2019. And I knew if like I was going to do like a 6 day ritual, I wanted to have the intent be something big, And so, um, being a father, and this was in 2019, so this is before COVID. So and also you probably remember in 2019 there was a lot. It's something that's always been in the discussion for decades, but in 2019 there was a lot of discussion in terms of the effects of climate change, global warming on our planet, and human, impact on that. And so and Greta Thunberg was very much out in the public, and doing a lot for that, and her being basically the same age as my son, something that really touched me. And so I wanted to do a ritual about the survival of human beings. And I know a lot of times magical practice is about results, and seeing the results for your ritual. But I decided for this ritual, it would be something that I obviously couldn't see the result for. Well, I mean, it could. I mean, if we end up perishing in the next few years and I'm still alive, I'll see that I failed. but but
Let's hope not.
yeah, right. And so it's something where it was like, well, yeah, I'm not gonna I'm gonna release, like as Crowley talks about, release my lust for results and just do my best for the intention anyhow. And so I was I was basically planning for about, well, let's see here, I started planning the details in the fall of 2019, and so I chose the dates of March. What was it? So each day it would have an entity associated with it. So the first day was the 6th of March, and so the 6th of March was dedicated to chaos. So in my mythology, the number 6 is associated to chaos. The number 7 in my mythology is associated to Babylon. The number 8 in my mythology is associated with Baphomet. And the number 9 for me is associated with Lucifer. And number 10 for me is associated with Satan. And number 11 is associated with Pan. And so it ended on March 11th. So each day was dedicated to that entity. And I did the details of the ritual I can't go into, because I even talk about that in the book. I say, like, the book basically outlines and goes into detail the preparation of what led up to the ritual. Then at the actual ritual itself, all the things that I did each day, I keep private, because it was something that the entities asked of me. And so I have for me, have a very intimate relationship with the entities I work with. And so I respect, if the respect is going one way, I need to make sure it goes the other. But what I did do was that I will say this, though, that part of the ritual was a scrying ritual each day, and was basically listening to what the entities were telling me and writing it down. So, and they would tell me their name, and I would write it down, and I would write down their, who they were, their description of themselves, and what they wanted to tell me. And so what they told me is in the book. And so all of what they spoke to me during the scrying is what's in the book. And but yeah, it was definitely it was a very intense experience. There was a number of times that like I get claustrophobic, and if I stay inside I like to stay in my apartment, but if I stay in it for a long period of time, and it was day after day, I started to go through stuff, and so I had to work through that, and then I figured certain things out, and but part of that experience, the challenge, the psychological challenges that I had to go through, was something that was I think benefited the ritual for sure, and overcoming those things. But yeah, it was definitely and so the book, it's called The End of the World, and it's the one that came out in 2020, and yeah, it was intense experience. I don't know if I'll do another one like that. I do rituals, but it was, yeah. I mean, it was something I know I wanted to do something like that at least once in my life. Like do some kind of like a multi-day ritual,
It's
and
understandable, yeah.
yeah, and just see it through, and just see it through to its end, and more, for the experience, and if whatever way it can help in terms of human beings surviving, great. I just felt like it's very important to me that I feel like human beings, not just for my own son's sake in his life, but I also feel like human beings have a lot more we can do. Like I feel like we just sort of touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of who we are and what we can do. So, I hope that we continue to survive and live for a long time to come.
Interesting. Now, is that the same book that describes your mythology, like the different entities you work with?
Yes, yes, definitely. I go into the different entities I work with in Love, Chaos, and Theory and Practice as well. Love, Chaos, and Theory of Practice is divided into 3 sections. The first part is like, how do you have love, chaos in your daily living, like day to day life, as a guiding principle. The second one is about psychology, so both individual psychological uh, things to work on, but also to group work. So I'm very much into group work, working with other human beings. So there's that exploration, and then I briefly discuss the history of peer-to-peer groups, from 12-step groups to other ones and stuff. So then the third chapter is love, chaos, magic, and in terms of the practice of magic. In part, for me, what's important for me for love, chaos, magic is that people create their own mythology. So you have entities you work with, but also create like a story too. Like you have a narrative there, a narrative thread that you work with in your mind. So you have kind of like relationships between the entities, and then also just in terms of what the entities mean to you and what they represent. And again, like a lot of this found its way very much so in my works in fiction in the Story of Us All trilogy. So these entities are, my relationships to them are very much is very important. It's even an important part of my day to day living as well too.
So that brings up a couple more questions for me. So the first one is, how did you decide which entities, and maybe how many entities do you work with? But how did you decide which ones were going to be in your mythology?
Sure, no problem. So what's really appealed to me from a long time ago was taking like a traditionally accepted perspective on, say, not just an entity, but on things in general. I've always been very much appealed to that in terms of what makes a good person good and what makes a bad person bad, what makes a good entity good and what makes a good and a bad entity bad. And so that's something that's always appealed to me since as far back as I can remember. And I think, having explored my childhood and my teens and my life, psychologically, some of the trauma that I experienced, as a kid, which was for sure in comparison to a lot of other people, not much, but the little that I did, there was a big sort of theme running through my childhood was on the surface, the family, it was a small family. It was just my mother and my stepfather and myself, seemed to be, great, but there were certain things my stepfather did that were in secret that caused me a lot of pain, and which I buried and repressed. And so, in my by definitely like by my 20s, like, and I started to actually, tell other people about what had happened and stuff. So this idea of what's on the surface, like it's the surface appearance of, say, what is good, and then realizing that underneath it there's something a lot darker, and that's there, like that's run throughout my all my books and throughout my life. So um, this extends to in terms of how I view entities. So for me, my perceptions or my judgments of a person is based on their behavior, and getting to know them over a period of time, for sure. Certainly, some people can show me pretty quickly who I feel like their nature is, but generally, like, you need time to kind of figure out, a person in terms of where they're coming from. And this definitely is true in the work that I do in helping people, helping these men in my job who are coming from prison, who some of whom have killed people. A lot of them are gang members. Definitely a lot, addicted to drugs, just as I was, and a lot of negative behaviors. So it's something that where I know for myself in terms of human beings, somebody can present themselves in a certain way and be something completely different. So what I knew, since that was an important part of who I am emotionally and like psychologically, I decided like the entities that have appealed to me even before I started practicing were entities such as Lucifer or Satan. And in my 20s, when I read the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey, I really liked it. I didn't know if I called myself a Satanist or not, but I liked the book, and I liked the satanic rituals, as well as the Satanic Bible. And I just always liked, um, where he was coming from. That I don't like evil, so so for me, I don't like seeing harm done to other human beings. I don't like, and I when I do that to other human beings, I feel bad about it. I feel remorse. I feel guilt, and I think those are actually healthy things to feel. So there was an element where I was like, well, there's on the one hand, there's with Satanism or Luciferianism, there's this celebration of the individual. There's a celebration of oneself and pride, and also a celebration of the senses of this material world, of the flesh, pleasure, sexual pleasure, pleasures, and other things, whether it be appreciation of beautiful art or and all its different forms, whether it's painting or writing or music or dance or whatever. Like I always felt like, well, this life that we're living is very much. I think there's a lot of horrible things for sure, but I don't want to. I feel like there's a lot of value in this life that we live, and it was another thing that got me into Nietzsche and existentialists such as Albert Camus. And so it was something that I liked this world that we live in. And I always felt that a lot of the monotheistic faiths, uh, and even to some extent Buddhism too, uh, it, there was this tendency, and again, this is from my perspective, just from my perspective, but that there was this tendency to sort of deny this world that we lived in. And certainly from my experience for 3 years as a Christian, in my early youth, that was my philosophy, and I was very much like a Gnostic Christian. I was very much like the kingdom of God was within me, but I was very much in denial of the pleasures of the flesh. I not only just stopped having sex with my girlfriend at the time, but I also stopped listening to music. It was just all about denial, and so that way I could focus my attention on God. And so for me, I over the years felt more and more of an affinity towards entities that represented who were connected to this world that we lived in, or this universe, this existence that we lived in. And so that's where I found myself being personally connected to Lucifer, and then started to create my own ideas of what Lucifer meant to me, and in terms of not only self empowerment in this world, but also traditionally held notions of what the monotheists like to lay claim to, things like compassion and love and understanding and forgiveness, sympathy, empathy, all these very caring, nurturing elements. I still feel very, very, very much it was a very important part of my life. So for me, the being a Luciferian, which is what I do consider myself. I consider what I call myself as an agnostic, Gnostic, Luciferian, and so it sounds oxymoronic, but for me, having direct experience with these entities, whether it be Lucifer or direct experience with with a transformation on a deep level, but also balancing that direct experience with embracing doubt, whether it is the two possibilities that maybe this gnosis that I'm going for, whether it be through my works of art, through other ways of life, um, is it could just be purely psychological, and that there is no spiritual reality, and I'm fine with that. But I'm also fine with the possibility that there might be a spiritual reality too. But yeah, that's how I got into sort of creating and developing a relationship with Lucifer. So it was from Lucifer, and then as I was starting to explore Aleister Crowley and his work, like about 10 years ago, I was really into Aleister Crowley, and so that's when I discovered Babylon. Then I found the Scarlet Imprint, which is what probably to me the greatest publisher around right now, and they publish excellent, beautiful books on the occult. And so it's Peter Gray and Alcestis Demetch, who I've been very fortunate to have a not like an intimate correspondence with, but I've been over the years uh, communicating with them, and they're just wonderful people. And I really like what the work that they both do in terms of their relationship with Babylon. And Peter Gray, his book, The Red Goddess, explores that relationship, but even more so, I feel, is The Brazen Vessel, which was a book that they co-wrote together and published in 2019, which is an amazing book, absolutely amazing book. Um, and Peter Gray also wrote a book on Lucifer as well, which I liked very much. But so that was, through Crowley and Peter Gray and Alcestis de Metz was my um, sort of exploring my relationship to Babylon. Chaos was another entity. So if one looks into some of the history of Babylon, so Chaos is actually her consort. So it is something that in thelemic circles they don't really go into it that much, but Chaos is like basically there is the male principle. So for me, uh, I felt like the way creation is created is through a duality. You find that there's a male and a female principle in reality, and so those are the two sort of like the parents to existence for me is Chaos and Babylon. And in prior to that, I felt like that there's essentially nothing. Out of nothing came everything in order to experience itself. And so there is this there's this notion that you probably come across called Ein Sof, which is nothing or no thing, and it's sort of like before everything, and that appealed to me, and I started to develop my own personal take on that, and then and there's a lot of other entities I work with that I've come across over the years through there's Tronzon. There's again as a Crowley entity that Crowley worked with, and it sort of represents more negative. And for me, this kind of became my bad guy, and this is the entity that I see as not just an external force or entity that's bad outside of myself, but is found within myself. And for me, is finds its expression in the denial of its parents. So in the monotheistic faiths, there is this male figure who claims to be the father of everyone, and basically wants everyone to be subjugated to its will and to be oppressed to its will. And this entity, this God, to me is sort of the voice of Chiranzan, and because of its denial of reality and wanting to control and wanting to oppress and wanting to do harm. And this entity I explore at length in these books I wrote, The Story of Us All. And I find that it is definitely a very important entity that one should work with on a psychological level. I don't include Tronzon in my practice at all, but on a psychological level, it's very important for me to have a relationship with this entity. And then just to round it up, the other entities I work with are ones that I also recently have in the last few years have appreciated some of the more the works of people like Jake Stratton Kent and others like him who basically have shown like there's this tradition of practitioners who've gone way back, and as throughout time it has changed a lot and it has included a lot of different philosophies, but it's the grimoire tradition, and for some it's the Goetic tradition, and that this is something that there's certain things about it, just like with chaos magic or Thelema with Crowley. There's certain things about it that I liked, and so I incorporated those things in my practice, and especially in that last Love Chaos book in End of the World. In the rituals I was doing, I included a number of things with that. So yeah, that's basically the entities I worked with over the years and how they came about, and they continue to be a part of my life. I have daily rituals I do with them, and it definitely helps to provide some structure in my life to inside this sort of chaotic world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, you've mentioned a few times that there's a connection between the story of us all and those entities, and especially the relationships between those entities. What's the elevator pitch for the story of us all?
Sure. So the story of us all, it actually takes three narratives from the past. So it takes the story of Parsifal, Aschenbach's book Parsifal, which is a 13th century German book that was. So Parsifal was one of the knights of the Round Table of King Arthur, and his version of Parsifal is less famous than some of the other. Most of the what we call romance books of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table, most of them are French, and those are cool too. But I like Aschenbach's version of Parsifal, and so there was basically this book that he wrote, and it's about a young man who's almost kind of a boy, and his quest to find the Holy Grail. So it opens, actually the beginning of the story opens with a big part of it is about his father. So the story is about this father and son. So I basically wanted to, like what I do with with Lucifer and these other entities, I took this old story of the quest for the Holy Grail and I basically flipped it upside down. And I made the two lead characters based on myself. So the father character is based on me, and the son is based the lead character, which is Parzival, is based on my son. And instead of finding the Holy Grail, they have to go on a search to find the what's called the Eye. And so there's this secret, powerful group of people basically are telling the father to go on and find the Eye, and then he gets lost into the spirit world. So in the stories, the spirit world interacts with the material world, and the son finds himself transported into the spirit world and has to go on this adventure to find his way back to his normal reality. And so he kind of interacts with all these different entities and goes on these adventures in the spirit world. So that's the first story. The second story is another inversion of an old classic Christian European literature, which is Dante's Divine Comedy. So Dante's Divine Comedy is, for probably most people know, it's a story about Dante, where his character is called the Pilgrim, as he goes through the three different places of the afterlife, and starting first in hell. And so he starts off in hell, and he's got to find his way out of hell, and he has a guide by an old Roman poet by the name of Virgil. Now, Virgil, being not Christian but a pagan, he can only go so far in helping Dante get out of hell. He is able to get him out of hell, and they run into all these different characters, a lot of them historical or people that Dante knew personally, and then or mythological or literary characters, and they're all being punished for various different things that they did wrong according to Dante's Christian philosophy. And so then they get out of hell, they go to purgatory, and then that's where that's where Virgil stops, and Dante finds his guide Beatrice in paradise, in heaven. And Beatrice was actually a woman that Dante was in love with when he was younger, but she died. So her soul is what's helped him to get to heaven, to get closer to God. And so there's these three different levels of the afterlife that Dante explores, and it's great. It's a masterpiece. It's one of the great works of literature, and it's something that a person can appreciate. You don't even have to really necessarily agree with Dante's Christian philosophy. It's just beautiful concept, beautiful execution, beautiful poetry, characterization, psychological development. So I just absolutely have loved it for a long time, and I've wanted to do my version of it too. So along with the quest for the Holy Grail, the second story in the story of us all is an inversion of Dante's Divine Comedy, and I call it the Divine Chaos. And so the lead character is based on myself. So like Dante, my version is autobiographical, and all the different experiences he goes through in his experiences in the afterlife, and his guide through the afterlife is Austin Osman Spare. So Austin Osman, yeah, it took me a while to figure out who I wanted to have as my guide, and I thought, who would I rather have as a guide through the afterlife than Spare, you know? And so that was the person I chose. was Austin Osman Spare, and so he's a character in the novel or in the story, and then they go through their experiences. And like with Virgil, he has to leave him at a certain point, not because of anything he did wrong or anything, or just that for psychological reasons. The lead character, based on myself, the autobiographical character, has to go alone, but then he finds the love of his life in the third book, which I'm working on right now, and he furthers his adventures. Um, but along with so for second story, he also has to find the eye. So there's this thing called the eye, which we're not really sure what it is, that the characters in these different stories have to find. And the third and final story in this trilogy is the Faust legend. So it takes the old Faust, Dr. Faustus, who, according to most of the versions of the story, sold his soul to the devil in order to gain power or knowledge and so forth. And the version of Goethe's Faust is the one I like the most, and it's the one that was the biggest influence on my version of Faust. And and in this version, I actually I make Faust even more sympathetic than Goethe's. Goethe's is probably, from what I've come across, the most sympathetic take on Faust. Uh, Certainly, I think more than Christopher Marlowe wrote an excellent play around Shakespeare's time called Dr. Faustus, which is even has some sympathetic elements to the character as well. But this one, basically, instead of God being the good guy, God in this version is Charonzon, and he's like the bad guy. And he sends Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles basically works for God or Charonzon to try to defeat Faust. Faust is basically, he's an alchemist, and he feels that he's actually finally found the Philosopher's Stone. So for those who know about alchemy, the alchemists, their pursuit is to find the Philosopher's Stone. And for Faust, he believes what the Philosopher's Stone is or was actually this ancient drug called soma. So his father had been trying to create this drug, soma, which they thought had been lost. And it's actually historical. There's some evidence that there was this drug that existed, and it was somewhere in the Indus Valley. And there's different theories in terms of what it actually was, what kind of drug it was. But Faust believes he found it, and he spent his whole life dedicated to finding it, and he created it. And then so the beginning of his story, God, Charonzon, finds out that Faust has created this drug. So he's told Mephistopheles to go and basically find a way to get Faust to give up his pursuit, because in addition to just getting the drug, it's not just to get this Philosopher's Stone, but it's basically the means or path towards liberation. And the liberation is a liberation away from the chains of Charonzon. The Charonzon basically has a grip or a hold on humanity through human insecurities, through hate, through violence, through oppression of various kinds that are actually is inside us psychologically, but also in terms of society as well, and in terms of how there's oppression in just so many different forms. So Faust has been in a quest to kind of find a means to liberate himself and the rest of humanity, and he feels he can do that with Soma. So Mephistopheles comes down and is basically is a way to try to subvert Faust's plans, and they make a deal on seeing who could win. So Faust basically agrees to the deal with Mephistopheles, and they go on their journey together. And also in the process too, Faust has a ritual right after taking the soma, where he has direct contact with Lucifer, and it's in his contact with Lucifer that Lucifer tells him that he needs to find the eye. So you have these three different stories where all the main characters are looking for this thing called the eye. And so from book 1, which is black, to book 2, which is white, and then book 3, which is red, which will be coming out later this year, they are on these journeys following all three different stories from book to book and where they're going. in their pursuit of the eye. And and yeah, and the different colors also represent. So in alchemy, the colors black, white, and red. You'll oftentimes find other colors that are associated with alchemy, but black and white and red are like the sort of, to me anyway, from what I've found, are like the core colors to the alchemical process. And like with the stories themselves, which are about inversions, taking like something from the past and changing it to something new, I took the meaning of the colors and changed them so that black traditionally in the alchemical process was about what's called negretto, which is death and decay. And so in this version, I changed it to being about birth and creation. And then the old take on white was innocence or purity. And in this version, it's about corruption. And in the last book or last color, red, the old version of what in alchemy, how red was seen as perfection, and in this version, it's seen as evolution. That it's not stopping, it's not perfect, but it's an ongoing evolutionary process. And so, yeah, yeah, that's that.
That's really cool. Have you thought about the relationship between hypersigils and what you've done?
Well, so yeah, I've heard of those before for sure, and I know like Grant Morrison's work with that, and heard that, and it certainly sounds fascinating. It And I think that there probably is some kind of, maybe, whether it's something that, where for me, a fair amount of this is like a lot of these stories is a form of a ritual, and in terms of creating this reality, and then sort of like not necessarily like imposing the reality that I've created through the stories onto reality, but with that possibility in mind, for sure, like these stories could have a way as a means to impact reality, um, for sure, it's definitely, it's found a way in how um, I view the characters, because a lot of the main, except for Faust, the main characters are all autobiographical, or my son. So there is this element of the personal that's connected to these stories, very much so. Like there's a lot of personal autobiographical stuff in these stories, um, both from my past and from my present, and then sure, and certainly affecting the future as well, for sure, for sure. So that's it wasn't something I was conscious of or intentionally tried to include, but I know a little bit about hypersigils, and from Grant Morrison and other people talk about them, and I definitely like that. Maybe it found a way to influence me indirectly.
That's interesting. So, I'm curious, how do you how do you come up with the idea to write a book like that?
Ooh,
What
yeah.
is your process? And I know that comes in stages because I also do things that are pretty strange. So I guess it's multi-part, right? It's how do you come up with the idea to write a book like that, and then how do you start planning for a book that has so many different conceptual things that need to fit together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long process. I think, man, some of these ideas have been germinating in my mind for a long time. And I think part of the problem is that I've had a process of writing for so long that I have to kind of remind myself, well, what do I actually do? But there is a process for sure, and so it's there's definitely a process of where a big part of what goes on is in my head. So I think a big part of what really works for me is cultivating a mindset or a frame of mind where I can explore these different things in my head and then be able to remember them. And then there's times where I'm like, okay, I need to write that down. So it's about kind of like, um, I know for some people, a lot of things, like everything has to be written down. For me, I spend a lot of time in my head for good or bad. Certainly, spending a lot of time in my head has resulted in a lot of bad things in my life. Where I obsess about things mentally. Um, so what I do is I kind of it's my mind kind of works in this way where it goes off in different tangents, but then there's also a lot of structure to what I do. So there's a lot of like planning out in my head, but there's things that were like originally there's like these three stories. Like I've always liked the story of Parzival, this young who's like in certain versions of the tale it's the Black Knight, and so like black has always been like one of my favorite colors, and I always liked the Black Knight, and I always liked how the reason why Parzival was the one who found the Holy Grail out of all the knights of the Round Table was his innocence, and so that always appealed to me was this notion of innocence, and innocence is something that's explored a lot in these books. But it was just first was like, okay, there's this story that I like, and but I wanted to do something different with it, and just very different. And I also again like Dante's Divine Comedy, something that I've always liked, and but there's some things about it philosophically which I completely abhor. Just as, like especially if you read the first part of the Divine Comedy, is hell, and just all these people being punished for certain things. Some of which I felt like that was just was cruel. So there's a lot of it is liking these old stories, and the same thing with Faust. There's certain things about Faust I liked, but in the different versions of it. But then I wanted to do something different. So a lot of it comes from in my head. What are the things I like, and what are the things I don't like? What are the things I want to do differently? And then it's from there, and that's basically I had been considering writing versions of these stories for a long time, for many years, before the actual writing down anything. But when I first started writing something down was around 2012. 2012 was around the time when I first started writing something down, and so I just started writing down stories and what kind of how they would be played out. And then I decided that they would all be basically connected together. So a lot of it's just writing down notes as the ideas come to me, writing certain things down. But then a fair amount of it's taking place in my head, and so I write outlines, and I write outlines to my stories, and then I refer to the books that I'm originally basing these on too. So I've read the books before, but then I go back to them again, and I look at certain scenes in the book, and I look at it and I see, okay, well, this is what they're doing here. How can I do it differently? So a big part of my process is actually I like to take what somebody else has done and then do it different, because it helps. Sometimes if I'm just sitting down and there's nothing in front of me, it's hard to get the creative juices flowing. So there's two things that I do a lot that help me with this is that I have, if it's based on a previous work, then I have the previous work in front of me, and I'm reading through it, and I'm like, as I'm reading through it, I'm like, okay, I like that. I don't like this. And then like, well, I don't. And then I ask myself, well, why don't I like this? What's going on here? And I realize like this something's being expressed, so I'm going to do it in a different way. And then the other thing that I do is that I will actually do like a form of automatic writing. I wouldn't say it's exactly automatic writing, but it's where if I hear things, I hear words, either if I'm in a cafe and I hear people talking, or if I'm listening to music, or whatever form I can take where I'm hearing something from somebody somewhere else, right? Or words that I see, and I take that as a starting point, and I use this writing. And so there's passages in the books where it's not necessary. It's not the story, but it's just these almost like these separate passages that are a way to explore where my headspace is at, and not only my headspace, but also what's my surroundings. So what am I hearing? What am I seeing in my current situation? Um, and this has a lot to do with the work that I do with when I work with entities. is trying to open myself up to what would be this, other side, whether it exists or not, whether it's just in my head and just these ideas, or there is this actual other realm or dimension that we interact with. It's like finding a way to open myself up to that, and then once I grab onto that and have that, then I anchor myself back and within the story, and I start exploring the story and start telling the story, and working on the characterization and the plot and where is it going. Um, so for me, it's definitely, there's like different elements, but those two elements right there are a big part of what helps me to get to the actual writing.
Interesting. Yeah, it was really interesting listening to you talk about your not exactly automatic writing. I've done similar things before, either in public places where there are a lot of people talking, or sometimes just putting on multiple sources of sound, like multiple songs or podcasts, or just multiple just sensory overload and kind of channeling it.
Huh? Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be interesting thing to try too, because for me, I generally will have like one song or one piece of music that I'll listen to, and then if I hear lyrics, and but so yeah, but it's not like I don't like to call it automatic writing because of the fact that I'm picking and choosing. So there's like a critical element that's going on, right? I'm not just writing out whatever words comes to me. Like if I hear a word or if I see a word, I don't just write it down. I like, well, I don't like that. it's
Yeah, it's almost a little closer to the cut up method where you are selecting pieces,
Yes,
depending on how you use the cut up method.
yes, definitely, definitely, definitely. And yeah, I think I think there's something interesting when writers can go and work with that method of where you have something in front of you, whether it's a text, written text, or you're hearing it through, and you're basically picking and choosing what to put down, you know, and whether or not we're actually communicating to this other side, or if it's just purely a material, experiment. It definitely is interesting what one can come up with and where one can go with those experiments.
For sure. And I think at the psychological model, you could still postulate that if you're communicating with an entity that's just a part of your subconscious mind, it could be causing you to selectively notice the parts of whatever you're listening to that are most associated with whatever its complex is.
Definitely, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
Um, well, I really like your work, and I'm going to continue to explore it more. And was is certainly one of the things that I wanted to mention, that because I know you do work in dance in the Buto, and that, by the way, I think we talked about this before. Like Alcestis Demetch of Scarlet Imprint, she's done some Buto work herself, and
Yeah, her videos are really cool.
yeah, aren't they? Yeah, they're really cool. She's amazing, and I was lucky enough. I was here in LA. They had it was in an exhibit of the founder of Buto, some photographs and videos of him and his performances, and I really love that a lot. And and so dance has always been a very interesting thing for me. My father, he was so into dance. He actually he loved dancing so much that he legally changed his last name to Dancer. And so yeah, he was a great human being, and miss him dearly. And but yeah, he was just a fascinating person, and he changed his last name to Dancer. And so dancing was always been something that, and I love to dance as well. I don't I will like to go to clubs and dance in my own way. And but one thing that I've always liked, in terms as a writer, is incorporating writing. I mean, sorry, dancing into writing. So there's a French poet by the name of Mallarmé, and he actually would write poems not with the actual like meaning of the words, but just in terms of how they looked on the page or how they sounded. And that's something that I love his work, and a big influence for me. But to me, there's an element of dance and to that, and where the words on the page are performing a kind of dance, and it's something that I wanted to do also in my music albums that I had, where I was reading passages from my books to music, is kind of allowing the words to dance. And so I was just curious for you as a dancer, as a performer, was just like, do you think that there's something there in regards to like how, as a reader or as a listener, if you're reading a book or you're listening, say, to an audible, somebody reading another book, um, like how much do you think that there's an element of dance in text, in the written word, whether it be storytelling or otherwise?
That's a really interesting question. Um, the cop out is that it all depends on how you define dance, like how poetic you want to be with that term. Um, and I think it really depends on how people read and how they engage with their text. And it might be kind of pulpy. I don't really read a lot of like action type fiction, but the people that are really good at writing that, they do a very good job of transmitting to you the tactile sense of motion and sudden stops and drops. Um, whereas sometimes you can even feel it. I tend to be a very visual reader. Like I try to construct almost like a little movie or maybe even just like stills from a graphic novel or something as I'm reading. I really like to imagine what it would look like if this book were realized visually in the style that the author is writing. And there's a sense of dance in that as well. The way you translate the text into whatever visual imagery.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
and I play around with that a lot with AI. Some of the videos I have up on YouTube um, either translate bits of well-known texts like the opening sequence of Finnegan's Wake or chapter 1 of Ezekiel where he ascends to heaven and he sees weird angels, but also bits of my own books presented as video rituals where it's you input little pieces of a text, like a few words at a time, into AI that translates each chunk of text into an image that it smoothly animates into the next chunk of text.
Right.
Um, yeah, so you can kind of get AI to do the way visual readers approach text. And then there's some people that they don't even visualize at all. They're just like strictly about the sound, kind of like Mallarmé's Sound Sense. I read a lot of his stuff in college too. Um,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, no, it is interesting how
Yeah.
that readers will be have a different way of experiencing a book, that you can, like, because for me, I'm like you. Like when I read a book, it's my mind instantly like imagines like a scene, like these characters in a scene and what's going on like visually in my mind. And as I'm writing it too, I write my stories in that sense. It might be because partly too, I was like a filmmaker before and wrote screenplays, so I was writing screenplays, and each scene had to be played out like and mentally in my mind how I imagined it would actually be taking place visually. So a lot of times, yeah, even as I'm writing, that's what's taking place. What's happening is I'm seeing scenes in my head. But I wonder, maybe not everyone actually reads books that way. Like they actually just do it. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember someone from a long time ago. I was talking to her about how I really enjoyed visualizing. Um, I think at the time I was reading Gravity's Rainbow, and that book has a lot of like crazy visual stuff. That's probably why I liked
Right.
it so much then. But and she was surprised. She thought that people generally don't visualize what they're reading, and she was an intelligent person, so it wasn't that she. People didn't talk about aphantasia then, like people that don't have a mental imagery.
Uh huh.
So I don't know if it was that or just some people are just a lot more auditory. I'm probably gonna say his name wrong, but Vladimir Nabokov.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
wrote, yeah.
Yeah.
There's an interview. where he's kind of an asshole. He's a very good writer,
Yeah.
but he specifically stated to the interviewer that his books were not for anyone that would hear the words that he wrote. I'm paraphrasing, but he was specifically denigrating readers um, that pay attention to the words. For him, he felt he was on such a grand literary level that when he would read, the text would be just immediately translated into pure feeling and information rather than like anything linguistic.
Oh, okay. So
Uh,
he,
but yeah,
yeah. So he probably wouldn't like someone like Joyce, who was, you're really he gets you kind of caught up in the language, or maybe,
yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't want to put words in his mouth, but
yeah,
like he was he was kind of an asshole. I wouldn't put it past him to have mean things to say.
sure, yeah,
Um, yeah, but yeah, some people when they read, it's very much an auditory kind of thing.
sure, sure. And you're right though. In Mallarmé's case, the poet we were talking about, it's there. There's the words in terms of how they look for the words themselves or how they sound, and so that was they're not necessarily like creating a scene. Like if you read like Baudelaire and you're reading his poems, you're getting usually a pretty like a something's going on there. Like there's some kind of story or something going on, either between him and somebody else or something. And yeah, it's interesting how there's a lot of possibilities when it comes to words. And I definitely, when it comes to dance, I think that's something that a person can explore in a lot of different ways too, and just in terms of how dance and text and how you can in your mind be dancing to the words, or the words could be dancing to you in your own way. And yeah, it's that's the thing when it comes to these art forms. There's just to me, there's so many different possibilities that we can explore and go in different directions with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Do you have any other questions?
Uh,
Anything you want to bring up?
well, just want to so for anyone who's listening to this, who's kind of curious about checking out my books, the next thing that's coming up is the third book to this trilogy that I was talking about, the story of us all, and that's called Red. And then after that gets released, um, each of the three separate narratives that I was talking about, they're going to be released as separate novels. So the story that's based on the Parzival book is going to be a separate novel, and then the story that's based on the Divine Comedy is going to be a separate novel, and the story that's based on Faust is going to be a separate novel. So they'll all be released later this year in the fall. And then if you like Shakespeare, my next book next year is going to be about the true author of Shakespeare. Uh, I don't think it was the person from Stratford, but that's a whole other thing. And so the book will be in the same vein as my other stories, but it'll be like a fictional biography about this true author.
Yeah, that all sounds really cool, and we'll have links to it in the description. So if anyone wants to find any of those things, we'll have a bunch of links down there for ease of access.
Cool.
All right. Well, it's been good. Thanks.
Yeah, this has been a great opportunity. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk for hours about it, but I realize we've already passed the hour mark. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on here, and we got a chance to talk about these things.